First off, the program I mentioned is funded by the American Rescue Plan Act, which is typically abbreviated to ARPA or ARPA. And this program serves any manufactured housing community that is registered with the state. So that's the first requirement for eligibility. And then the second is that your community has known or suspected problems with the drinking water system, wastewater system, stormwater, or drainage systems in the community. So there are 4 different types of grants available in the application that's currently posted. The first 3 are through the Healthy Homes Initiative, and I'll speak to those in more detail in the next few slides. And the 4th here is through a separate program that's also funded by the American Rescue Plan, and we've included on the application with the Healthy Homes grants so that manufactured housing communities can apply for funding in one place instead of filling out multiple applications for different ARPA programs. So to quickly run through these, and again, I'll go into more detail in the next few slides. A needs assessment grant would be for any manufactured housing community who knows or suspects that they have problems with their water infrastructure systems, but maybe aren't quite sure what the scope of the project would be, how to prioritize issues, or maybe even where to start with addressing the problems. The needs assessment grant would be the place to go for that. The next kind of phase in working through problems in water infrastructure would be if you have a project identified in your community, but you haven't yet received permits or designs for the solution. Permitting and technical assistance, that grant would be the kind of the next step in the process for completing those projects. And the third here on this list would be a grant for construction, probably the most self-explanatory out of any of these options. It would be for a community that has a project that's like shovel ready. You have the permits in place to begin the work, you're just lacking the funding to actually start construction. And fourth on this list is for 3-acre permit obtainment, which would be for any manufactured housing community that is considered a 3-acre site. And that would be a community with more than 3 acres of impervious surface, and therefore needs to obtain a 3-acre stormwater permit. And that grant would provide engineering assistance to apply for that specific permit. So again, I'll go into all of that in a bit more detail here. So the ARPA Healthy Homes grant amounts are listed at the top there, and then the 3-acre stormwater at the bottom. For each grant, a manufactured housing community would either have a limit for how much they can apply for. That's noted on this slide here, and I'll read through those in a second for the phone callers. Or they would be awarded what's called a grant of service. So the state would match the manufactured housing community with a contractor who would do the work for the community, and the state would pay that contractor directly for the work that gets done. So the 2 grant of services that I'm mentioning here would be the needs assessment grant or the 3-acre stormwater grant. So either of those, if you're applying for those, the way that would be awarded is that the state would match you with an engineer that's going to do the work entailed for those grants, and the state will pay the contractor directly for you. For the other 2, permitting and technical assistance and construction, the limits are listed here. That's $75,000 maximum per MHC for permitting and technical assistance. And for construction, eligible projects would be in the range of $25,000 through $1,250,000. And for each of those permitting and technical assistance or construction grants, the MHC will be applying for the grant and the state will be paying MHCs directly for that. And I'll go into this a bit more, but that would mean that the manufactured housing community will select the contractor that they choose to work with. Often there's existing relationships there, and we want to be able to honor contractors that you trust working in your community. Okay, so the needs assessment grant, again, this is the first phase of identifying a project and wanting to know more about the scope and the next steps for getting it done. And the manufactured housing community that's applying would be matched with an engineer who does the work for them, and the state would pay them, pay the contractor directly. And the outcomes of receiving this form of funding would be a preliminary engineering report. An environmental review would be conducted, and the contractor would write up an environmental information document, and the contractor would conduct community outreach and discuss outcomes and solutions that are specific to the manufactured housing community. And the benefits of receiving these three deliverables or outcomes is that it gives you really thorough information about what next steps need to get taken and what the project is going to entail. And specifically, these deliverables are often requirements for grants that an MHC might be pursuing through other funding sources other than the Healthy Homes Initiative. So this kind of gives you a starting point for applying for money from either the Healthy Homes Initiative in a later stage or through another agency or organization that might award funding for permitting or construction further down the line. You can go to the next slide. Great. So permitting, technical assistance and permitting and construction. So like I've said, manufactured housing communities who apply for this will end up getting paid directly for that work, and then they'll be responsible for paying the contractor that they hire to do the work for them. And in that case, MHCs will need to provide invoices that fit the scope of work that that this funding can be applied towards. So it's listed at the bottom. There's engineering, permit, insurance, construction costs, etc. Those sorts of things for the project at hand. And the state will pay the MHCs directly for those invoice amounts up to the funding limit. And for 3-acre and permit services, I'm gonna point us towards Megan Stetnish, who is the point person for that program, to tell us a little bit more about the funding available there.
Sure. So 3-acre permit assistance is going to be available to MHCs that have been notified by the Stormwater program that they're a 3-acre site and that they need to apply for Stormwater General Permit 3-9050. That's the 3-acre permit. So a 3-acre site is a site that has more than 3 acres of impervious surface, like paved and gravel roads, parking areas, and rooftops. So it's any surface that doesn't allow stormwater to kind of seep into the ground. So to help 3-acre MHCs that need help with getting a permit, we're asking the MHCs to indicate their interest in receiving permit services from a pre-selected by DEC engineering consultant. So once we have a list of interested 3-acre MHCs, we'll release a request for proposals seeking a consultant to perform the work needed to submit a full notice of intent for each 3-acre MHC that needs to apply for the 3-acre permit. So each 3-acre MHC that would like the permit services will receive the following from the pre-selected engineer. So it'll be an engineering feasibility analysis, a completion of site plans, a 100% design for stormwater infrastructure that handles water flowing from impervious surfaces, and a 3-acre permit application to the DEC Stormwater program for a full notice of intent, or NOI, and that'll result in the 3-acre permit obtainment. So 3-acre MHCs will not be required to pay anything to the pre-selected engineer, because we'll be paying them directly by the state for its services. So the permit application cost and related engineering services will be 100% covered by state fiscal year 2022 ARPA 3-acre stormwater funds. That being said, like, we are aware that, this is just the first step in the process, which is 3-acre permit obtainment. So we're still working out ways to, develop a, like, 3-acre construction portion of things. But we will send out an update when the program is underway. And then for 3-acre MHCs that don't want to participate in the engineering permit services, either because they already have an engineer or they're just not interested in participating, we are exploring a rebate option that allows the MHC's engineer to directly receive the permit rebate for initial or full notice of intent services. So engineers would be able to apply for the rebate through A&R Online with the MHC's permission to receive direct payment as soon as the stormwater program staff confirms that the submitted initial or full NOI has reached the administratively complete stage. And the idea behind that is to allow for faster payment for 3-acre services and the ability to keep the MHC's existing engineer. Right now, we're planning for up to 100% of the initial or full NOI permit application costs and engineering services to be eligible for the rebate. But we're still working out a cap for the engineering service costs. And there you go. Back to you, Rosalie.
Great, thanks, Megan. So the timeline, as many of you know, the application is currently open, and we encourage any community that believes they're eligible to apply on or before July 27th. Once your community has submitted an application, we'll review them and send you a notification, a response from the Agency of Natural Resources by September 9th. So to submit an application, the preferred submission method is by email to Nicole Streeter, so nicole.streeter@vermont.gov. And the application details can be found at the link that's posted on that slide. Let me see if I can just copy that into the chat. It's not working for me. Nikki or Jackie, if one of you could post the link to the application in the chat, that would be great. So when you're ready to submit the application, ideally by email, but there are some other options for folks who don't have access to email or a computer. The application requirements are slightly different depending on the grant type that you select. So for the grants of services that I was mentioning before, anything that the state is paying the contractor directly, what we'll need from the manufactured housing community is a signed application. That's attachment B. If you open up the application packet, it's you'll see the application is attachment B. And then the other thing that we would need is the State Fiscal Recovery Fund program assurances, and that just needs to be signed. And that's also, it's on page 2022 of the application packet. The application for permitting and technical assistance and construction is a bit more in depth because for those grants, we'll be paying the manufactured housing communities directly. So you're responsible for more paperwork, but it does give you more flexibility with selecting the contractor that you want to work with. So again, signed application, that's attachment B, like I mentioned for the other grants. Also, we'll need a procurement policy. So whatever your community's procedure is for selecting the contractor that you work with, we'll need that documented. A certificate of insurance, a deliverables table, essentially a proposed timeline with outcomes marked on that timeline for the project. And again, this is all found in the application packet with more instructions than I'm going through verbally here. Also a risk assessment questionnaire, that's attachment F, and then the same thing I mentioned before, the signed copy of the State Fiscal Recovery Fund program assurances is also required for that. So I suggest going through this just on a slide is seems like a long list without the actual documents in front of you. If you have questions about this, I suggest looking through the application packet. I think that will answer a lot of the questions to be able to put eyes on what each of these requirements is. You can go to the next slide now. Thanks. Oh, that's the end of my time. So I think also any other questions about the application Jackie might get to now here with the bidders conference Q&A. So I'll pass it over to her.
Hello, everyone. Now we're just going to go through, well, first to start off, my name's Jackie Peterson. I'm an Accessible Assistance Specialist in the Environmental Assistance Office. And now we're just going to go through all the questions that have already been submitted and our answers to them so that everyone has fair and equitable access to the same information. And then we'll have time at the end to answer any additional questions that you may have that we don't answer here. So kind of just to run through the questions that we've already gotten, we've gotten a couple people who've asked for hard copies of the applications because they don't have access to computers or printers. We can absolutely mail you an application. We can also receive applications through the mail. I have that address listed below. And you can also use your local library for printing if you find you don't have access to a printer, but you would still prefer to go that route. We've also received the question if the grant writing costs are reimbursable. They are not. Costs associated with grant preparation or review are not reimbursable. The only thing the funding can be used for is water infrastructure improvements. Frozen. Sorry about that, guys. Oh, okay, here we go. We've received several questions about the Permit Navigator result. If you look to the application, attachment B, there's a question asking you to fill in a Permit Navigator result. Some people were wondering if they were already in the permit process, if they were still required to fill that in. We would like everyone to fill that in regardless of the grant type that you're applying for. It's a guidance tool that helps us identify what environmental permits you might need for your project using your project location site. It's a quick process. It's just a guidance tool. It's not signing you up for any formal permit applications. It just helps us get an idea of the environmental sensitivity of your project. If your MHC is already in the process of completing a project, this particular individual had already completed a quarter of their project. They were wondering if they were still eligible and if the work that was already done is reimbursable. So MHCs who have already started construction are still eligible, but we can only reimburse costs that are incurred after a fully executed agreement. So any work that's done before that fully executed agreement is not reimbursable, but we can cover any cost from that point forward. Are 3-acre stormwater projects required to have engineering? Yes, they are. Stormwater projects are required to have an engineering plan. After submitting the initial notice of intent, landowners will have 18 months to complete an engineering analysis, and then an additional 5 years to actually install that stormwater system, but they are required to have engineering. We've received a couple different versions of questions about procurement policies and which ones are acceptable. HUD compliant nonprofit procurement policies are accepted. We just ask that you tweak them to suit the needs of your manufactured housing community. We've also listed a guidance procurement policy from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns that you can use as a template if your MHC doesn't currently have a procurement policy. We've been asked if funding can be applied to projects that have already been completed. It cannot. Retroactive projects are not eligible. Again, we can only reimburse costs that occur after the fully executed agreement. Could grants be used to fix drainage issues due to putting in new roads or foundations? Can money be used for the installation of new manufactured homes or foundations? The answer is yes, we can use the ARPA money to fund drainage issues from roads or foundations. That's an eligible expense, but the money cannot be used for new homes or foundations. That's not an eligible expense. For the needs assessment, people were wondering if it could be used for more holistic planning study, looking at things like roads and electricity or other park infrastructure, but it can only be used for water infrastructure. It's very tailored just to assess wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater drainage needs. There's been a little bit of confusion, which hopefully Rosalie's slide cleared up, about what's required for needs assessments applications. This particular individual was wondering how to fill out a deliverables table for a needs assessment grant. And the answer is, if you're only applying for a needs assessment grant, you do not need to fill out a deliverables table. That's only relevant for technical assistance and construction grants. If you're applying just for the needs assessment grant, the engineer will be providing us with the information in the deliverables table, and that's not something you have to worry about filling out. Can grants cover drinking water systems with a leak? So the answer is the funding is left intentionally broad. It can cover small repairs or complete system overhauls. It just needs to be some kind of improvement to water infrastructure within the community. And this individual also asked if the application can be mailed. It can be mailed to the address I listed on one of the previous slides. We received a couple questions kind of about timing, and the answer generally is that the timeline will vary based on the manufactured housing community and how long the contract stage takes. So there are no target dates or set disbursement schedules. It'll be very project based. And our applications reviewed on a rolling basis are after July 27th. All applications will be reviewed after the closing date on July 27th. Applications will be scored by a committee, and only after the submittal date, we won't be accepting any applications after that July 27th cutoff. The most common question we've gotten is which grant the MHC should apply for, and I would say that really just depends on where your community is in the process. We encourage applicants to apply for a grant type that matches where they're at in the planning construction process. A needs assessment grant is for communities that don't know what type of project they need or could benefit from. And technical assistance and construction grants are for people who've identified a project, they know what they need to work on, and they just need the funds to get that ball rolling. I encourage communities kind of at this stage to apply for both technical assistance and construction grants because their costs are often sequential and congruent. We've had a couple different versions of this last question, which is, can my municipality or business or nonprofit submit an application for joint projects within an MHC? And the answer is no, because only the MHC is eligible for the money, but we highly encourage partnerships and collaboration between partner organizations and MHCs. You can certainly work together to fill out applications or submit grant materials, but only the MHC itself is eligible for the funding. So all the questions I just went through will be available here at the Vermont Business Registry and Bid System. We'll also have it linked on that second site we have listed below, along with a video recording of this presentation. And at this time, we'll take any questions, but we just ask that people keep their questions more general so that they can benefit the whole group, and limit the more specific situational questions to a phone call or an email. All of our contact information right here if you want to reach out or have any additional material sent to you. And at this time, I'm going to have Nikki either monitor the chat if you want to enter your questions into the chat, or if you could raise your hand if you have a question through the Teams webinar, and then we'll set aside a time at the end for people who've called in to ask questions.
Perfect. We'll start with Liz Curry has her hand raised.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First, I want to say, and I'm totally not sucking up at all, you guys did an amazing job with this application. And I just want to say, if you could pass it on to Adam Miller, thank you so much for working with other funding partners who understand this sector and for taking what looks like all the advice and more. And thank you all for your technical assistance so far. It's been amazing and the application is great. My question, I have a couple questions. So one is that sometimes when engineers are working on these infrastructure redevelopment projects, the need to update Act 250 permits, old Act 250 permits comes up. Can we include that fee in the request? And do you want me to go through all my questions or stop?
I would say one at a time.
Sorry.
Yes, any permit that is relevant to the construction of your project is eligible, and that would include Act 250.
Okay, great. Then the other question was, will the committee be scoring so that we might get, will this be an all or nothing up or down award? Or if, there's not enough information for a part of the project, would you just award like partial grants for what, does seem to score? Like if we're doing TA plus construction, part of the problem is, it's hard to estimate construction costs that aren't going to be known until we get a permit for the design.
Yeah, so we would,
to come into compliance with ANR clean water rules, we have to do the construction project as soon as possible. So, and like the design and permitting is almost done, funded with other sources, but it's just classic mobile home park confusing projects that have multiple system needs. So there's going to be requests that ask for different things that are in different phases.
right. So the scoring will go by, the grant types are separated out for that reason. So the scoring will go by grant type. So it's possible that an MHC that applies for both technical assistance and permitting and construction could just get awarded technical assistance and permitting. I also think this is just an opportunity to touch on something that Jackie mentioned and clarify it a little bit, is that the question about whether applications will be rolling after this round. They won't be rolling after this round, but it is possible, depending on future funding allocations, that we might be able to reopen the application in future years for another round of funding. So in that case, it would be, if an MHC got accepted for technical assistance and permitting, but then didn't get their construction application accepted this year, they may have an opportunity to reapply for that once they've gone through technical assistance and permitting, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's what we're hoping for. It's not quite guaranteed yet, but that's
yeah, thank you. I mean, on that point, I would just say that, from an equity standpoint, if you could advocate up the chain that ANR got over 100 million in ARPA funds, and to put out 3.25 for this sector is, woefully inadequate given the pent up demand and the need and the very low incomes that are in the parks of less than $60,000 for almost, 90% of the residents. So more money is desperately needed. Other funders have closed the door on mobile home park applications from this sector and told us, go to ANR. So here we are, and it needs a lot more money. So I know you guys don't have any control of that, and I know you're sympathetic. So my last question is, many of these parks need project management support from people like me who do grant writing, grant administration, oversee the engineers, liaisons between the parks and everybody else, do the procurement for construction. Can we include our project management costs in the application? This is the only source to get them from.
Actually, I don't think I have a very clear answer about whether or not project management costs for an outside agency would be included. Could I get your email and get a more definitive answer for you on that?
Yeah, I mean, just for example, like the money that's paying me to write these applications is from BHFA as a loan to the park. They can't afford any more debt. VHCB has closed the door on funding for this sector. VCDP takes 6 months to get money. So you guys are it. There's, USDA has a grant application round in December. This park has a, 2 failed leach fields and an unfinished water system that has been for 5 years, trying to come into compliance. If they don't have a consultant like me or a nonprofit helping them, and there's got to be money to pay for that, then there's no point in submitting the application because they just don't have anybody to manage the whole project.
Yeah, I know we can't cover the grant writing costs because that's prior to the executed agreement. Yeah. But yeah, I don't have a super clear answer on the project management for the construction stage, and I will have to get back to you at a later date.
Okay, well, I'll put it in the application anyway, for now, and then hope to hear back. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have.
So it does seem like a couple people also had that same question about the management costs. The answer, although we don't have that right now, will be posted on that Q&A document, which will be posted to the Healthy Homes ANR website, as well as the Vermont Business Registry website. And we will be able to get that answered for everyone.
Could I hop in with a couple questions that came up in the chat quickly? So I think, yeah, as Nikki just said, to answer Shauna's question, all of these questions will get publicly posted. And I also just wanted to touch on the Permit Navigator question about Act 250. It looks like Megan Snetnish threw a link in there that should work for Permit Navigator. At least it is working for me. So if for folks who are having trouble with that, I'd suggest clicking that link and seeing if that makes a difference. And the question about Permit Navigator and Act 250 is that Permit Navigator does provide guidance for Act 250 permits. So when you say, if you open up Permit Navigator, the first set of questions is about Act 250, and that's how it's supposed to work. And then it follows up with environmental permits after that. So that's standard. That's the way it's supposed to go.
All right, looks like we have a question from Joanne Bodker.
Hi. So you did answer my question about applying for technical assistance. Sorry, I gotta turn this. Technical assistance plus construction, which is great. Could we also apply for multiple projects per park? Like I have a scattered site, but it could obviously apply to a big site as well, where I know I need to redo my sewage lines in one part, but in another site, I'm looking for more of a needs assessment. Could we do multiple applications for one park?
Absolutely. You can apply for whatever grants are relevant to your projects there. You might be shovel ready for your septic systems, but you know that you probably need more of a needs assessment for, say, drinking water or whatever the issue may be. Just make sure that it's clearly stated in your application, the differences between those two needs, and that they're not for similar projects.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and add that the need for in the application for you to clarify that they're for separate projects is really important, because otherwise we might look at that and say they're applying for needs assessment and construction, meaning that they're not actually ready to go to construction for that project. So to be able to clarify that these are to address separate needs and the construction phase is actually ready right now is important for us to be able to look at that and understand what you're trying to do.
Okay. I have another question. The drainage, since you're saying drainage, we have a site where we're shovel ready, and it's about erosion into a ravine that abuts the site, and basically the erosion is getting close to the homes, very close, and so we're planning to stabilize the slope. Could that fall into that drainage category?
I guess I need a couple follow-up questions. What's the cause of the erosion? Is it just a steep embankment, or is it still a water issue that's causing the erosion?
It's a steep embankment, but when there's a water event like a large storm is when we see significant erosion on that bank that's on the site.
I think that would be an eligible project under the assumption that fixes to the stormwater or drainage around the site would reduce that erosion. I don't know if it could fund things like moving the foundation of that home or bank stabilization unless that was part of the stormwater engineering. So that's not probably a very clear answer for that. I don't know if you've already consulted with an engineer on that project, but probably a couple follow-up questions in order to determine if that is a water infrastructure improvement or if that's kind of a separate issue.
Okay, thank you.
I know there are a couple questions in the chat, and we'll get to those right after we hear from Nathan. Is his hand raised?
Hey everybody, Nate Lantieri with the Mobile Home Program at CVOEO. Thanks for such a full presentation and for having this grant in general. Definitely something that's pretty needed. And we're kind of in this from a little bit of a different perspective than a lot of other folks in that we don't actually manage any of the parks ourselves, but are really just supposed to be a support for park residents. And one of the gaps that we've started to realize is that there are some particularly smaller private parks throughout the state that have water infrastructure situations that we haven't really known about how severe they are until we get to near cataclysmic situations where, we have two situations that could end up in like potential mass evictions as a result of water system failure. But we are not the ones, managing these parks, nor do we necessarily have the capacity to write needs assessment applications for these parks. But we know that they need them. We know that they need them. And some of these private park owners are perhaps overmatched in terms of their capacity right now, or, in less fortunate circumstances, interest in going through this application process. And, considering that this is some, while ideally longer term sustainable funding, as of right now, in terms of what's been approved, potentially the only shot that some of these communities will have to get a sense of what their needs are, to have a sustainable water system. So I guess my question, and it's kind of a long-winded one, is what should be the best step or steps taken in between now and that 27th deadline to make sure as many of these parks that we know have water situations, but just not sure how big, are at least kind of included in the consideration or conversation as funding is being dispersed.
Yeah, so we're not limiting funding just to larger parks. Smaller parks are certainly encouraged to apply. I understand owners being stretched thin. They might not have the time for the application, but the application doesn't need to come from the park owner. It can come from any resident within the community. And while I can't fill out applications for people, I'm certainly able to provide assistance over the phone for people and kind of walk them through the process. I know that these grant applications can feel very overwhelming and confusing for people to kind of step into that role. Did I answer your full question? I feel like I missed part of that.
Yeah. So I guess it's good to know that, residents can apply. And I guess that's kind of my question is that the best option for these situations where we may not be able to get a park owner to apply for this within that time? Is it instead to, work with a park resident to see if they can collaborate with the department to get an application in? Is that likely the best option, or maybe this is something for a longer conversation after?
Yeah, I mean, a longer conversation is probably always beneficial, but my immediate recommendation is to try and find a resident who might be willing to serve as a point contact for that and fill out the application. I know I've worked with another resident in a community in Waterbury, and we've been working on filling out the application with just like a little bit of coordination with the owner, but she's primarily kind of taken on that role.
Okay. Because there's definitely a few that we will follow up on. Cool. Thank you all.
All right, it looks like we have, maybe Rosalie just answered it.
Yeah,
so it's a question.
Yeah,
it's a question about Permit Navigator. Says it asks very technical questions like slopes in the park. There might not be a way to answer these without paying an engineer for their time. How should those questions be answered?
Yeah, so I just put an answer to that in the chat. So first of all, we suggest you call us and get some assistance filling it out, and we'll assist as much as possible. Obviously, we're not an engineer that's coming out to your site to measure slopes in that situation, but we can certainly help with some of it. And then if there are still things that you can't answer without paying an engineer for their time, then we suggest you fill it out as best you can for the application and revise it after, if the MHC is guaranteed funding and an award is made. And then you have an engineer that you're working with and are getting paid for their time, you can then revise the permit navigator result to get a more accurate answer for what permits you may need.
Yeah, and I'll just add the permit navigator. It's a guidance tool. If you don't know all the answers, that's fine. Like I said, it's not a formal permit application process. It's just a series of questions to help get you thinking about what environmental permits your project site might need. So it'll help identify if there's a wetland nearby, or if the number of gallons of water you're withdrawing might trigger some kind of other DEC permit. So just do the best you can with the permit navigator, but you're not committed to any of the answers that you give there. It's just a guidance tool.
There was a suggestion to use the A&R online atlas as it has some basic steep slope information. So thank you for adding that.
Yeah, I just
looks
put a link in there too for to get to the A&R atlas.
perfect. And then we had another question come up about attaching longer answers where space may be limited on the application. I will put that out there for everyone. Yes, take up as much space as you need. Obviously, the more technical information you're able to provide, the better. So attach what need be, just make sure it's labeled really well so it's easy to figure out which question is the extended answer. And looks like we had another, how should we estimate Act 250 permit costs?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. We will have to look into that. I'm sure there's some kind of rough estimate that we'll be able to provide you once we speak to the Act 250 program.
Any other questions you'll have? Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, people who've called in, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask questions at this time, that would be great.
Liz, it looks like you have another question.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that I'm wondering if the scoring rubric, I'm sorry, I don't remember if it includes whether or not leveraging other funds is a scoring criteria.
So coordination with other agencies, nonprofits, funding sources is a part of the rubric and will be considered. We want to make sure that we're awarding money to people who, you know, we can get the most value for the money that we put into the projects. So if there are nonprofits or matched funds available, then that value is increased.
And so along that point, if we've maxed out other funding sources before getting to this point in like a, 4 to 5 year project that's been underway, will you count that as, we've already gotten money from these other sources, but they've said, don't come back?
Yeah, just make sure it's clear about where funding came from, how much was awarded, and kind of, I guess, the closure terms that were left there as part of your application. I believe there's space on the application itself to include other funding sources and grants that the project has received.
Okay, thanks.
So we did have in the chat, looks like Kevin added Act 250 costs are based on a percentage of construction costs. There's an Act 250 application manual, and it looks like Rosalie added that manual link in the chat.
Yep, and it's a long document, so Kevin pointed us towards page 19. Should give you a place to start.
Thank you, Kevin.
Any other questions floating around? Isaac, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I don't.
We may have lost you. All right, Isaac, we'll give you a chance to reconnect. Mark, go ahead.
Oh, Mark, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Is there a consideration for the funding that's been put into a project already? You know, like say for instance, there has been some construction that went on and engineering work that's been done, you know, significant, you know, $50,000–$75,000 worth of work. Is that a consideration as far as funding sources go, that you self-fund the startup of the project?
Yeah, definitely. We're absolutely considering like how shovel ready projects are at the construction phase.
Okay.
So that it'll be a consideration as well. And I think that goes kind of with the same value comments, just knowing that the money is ready to be spent and permits are in place is definitely something that will be considered.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Looks like we have another question in the chat. Does ANR know yet what sort of construction standards the program will be requiring, i.e. Davis-Bacon, US Steel, etc.?
So I don't think we trigger Davis-Bacon requirements. That might be a better question for you, Nikki. We do in once we get to the contract stage, we'll outline all the permits that will be needed based on the project type that you applied for, but it does get kind of specific based on which water infrastructure type project that you're applying for.
Yeah, that's correct. Because none of these will be hitting that Davis-Bacon limit. I won't say none of these. I should say none of these, or shouldn't say none of these will trigger that, because you never know. Policies kind of change all the time. So, but as of right now, none of them would trigger Davis-Bacon. But ARPA has been ever evolving, so that could change. And Mark, do you still have a question or another question?
No, I'm kind of all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like the link for the permit navigator that was put into the chat earlier does seem to be working. So that's a good resource if anybody needs that one. Again, I would just point, if any questions do come up during filling out this application, or you have specific questions about the individual park or project, definitely reach out. Our contact information is on the screen. It's also, again, I'll point towards the request for application. It's in there as well for those who are joining us by phone. There's no other questions. We can definitely hang out for a couple minutes if things pop up, but thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I look forward to reading all your applications.
Great. Thank you very much.